Ma'am, the event is live on Facebook. We may start now. The event is live on Facebook.
Shall we start?
Swati ma'am, shall we start? Please unmute. Please unmute.
Sir joined?
Just let me check. No, ma'am.
Can we wait for 2 minutes and
Yeah. Just let me know when he joined in.
yeah, because
शुक्लां ब्रह्मविचारसार परमा आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं वीणापुस्तकधारिणीम् अभयदां जाड्यान्धकारापहां हस्ते स्फाटिकमालिकां विदधती पद्मासने संस्थितां वन्दे तां परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम्।
Ma'am, please ask sir to join.
I have already messaged.
All right.
सरस्वती प्रथमं भारती नाम द्वितीयं च सरस्वती तृतीयं शारदा देवी चतुर्थं हंसवाहिनी प्रथमं भारती नाम द्वितीयं च सरस्वती प्रथमं भारती नाम जिह्वाग्रे वसते नित्यं ब्रह्मरूपा सरस्वती प्रथमं भारती नाम द्वितीयं च प्रथमं भारती नाम सरस्वती
Aditi, you can start.
All right, ma'am. Ozone, as we all know, is like a protective shield that protects us from the excessive amounts of UV radiations. And life, as we all know, would not exist without it. To remind us of the importance of Ozone Day, every year for the past 35 years, September 16 is noticed as World Ozone Day. Ozone for Life is the slogan for Ozone World Day 2020, which reminds us of the indispensability of ozone in our lives and our responsibility towards its protection. Good morning, everyone. This is Aditi Dudeja, and I feel privileged to extend my warm welcome to all on behalf of the Society of Botany and Zoology, Bionomy, ARSD College, to the national webinar on Global Ozone Day under the aegis of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell. We feel honored to have with us respected Principal Sir, Dr. Gyantosh Kumar Jha sir, who is the fountainhead of illuminating ideas, an idol of knowledge and experience, and inspiration to all of us. Dr. Vinita Tuli ma'am, our convener of the webinar committee and member of IQAC, without whose support and guidance, this wouldn't have been possible. We graciously welcome our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Shikha Bhasin ma'am. We thank you, ma'am, for taking the time out to be with us today. Now, before we begin with the event, I would like to read out few netiquettes for you all. So first of all, when you enter in the session room, you have to enter with your registered name. And if you exit by mistake, then you have to enter with the same name again. And you should always mute yourself when you're not speaking. And doubts will be entertained only at the end of the session. Just type in your box in the chat box and our team will carry those to the respective speaker. You may be allowed to unmute in case your question is not clear or to the point. Don't type good morning, good evening, etc. in the chat box because this leads to a little disruption. Now, you can also disable your video once you are in the session. So, I now humbly invite Dr. Swati ma'am, our convener ma'am, to grace the platform.
Very warm welcome to all of you. Good evening, respected sir, our honorable speaker, Shikha Bhasin ma'am, dear colleagues and my dear students. Today we celebrate Ozone Day to mark the Ozone for Life slogan as told for the year 2020. It took millions of years to form this layer, which protects us as a roof from the harmful UV radiation, but it just took a couple of years to create a hole that's been created on this protective layer. So what should we do about it? As I was going through various environmental codes, I read one which is most apt for the today's condition. It's that we are waiting for someone to take over. We are waiting for somebody who would take initiative in saving the environment. And who is that somebody, if not one of us? So on behalf of Bionomy, our Society for Botany and Zoology, Department of Botany and Zoology, ARST College, we hold this webinar to know the importance of ozone layer in our life. Without further I'm sorry. Without further delay, I would like to request our principal sir, Dr. Kintu, to say a few words.
Thank you, Swati. Uh, Today's speaker, Ms. Sikha Bhasin, Dr. Swati Viswas, convener, coordinator of the biology department and convener of this program, Dr. Vibha Narang, colleagues and my dear students. On behalf of Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College, I welcome Ms. Sikha Bhasin in this webinar on the occasion of Ozone Day. As
Ma'am, sir lost the connection and he has joined again.
Ravi,
Yes, sir. You are audible now, sir.
okay. Sorry. Uh, I once again I welcome Ms. Sikha Bhasin, who is speaker for today's webinar on the occasion of Ozone Day, and I'm thankful to her that she has given her valuable time to deliver her lecture on this very pertinent topic. And I hope that everybody who is in this program, my students, our students and teachers, everybody is going to be benefited from her lecture. So I thank you, Ms. Bhasin, and once again I welcome you. As Dr. Swati Viswas has told earlier that how ozone layer is important for our life, and we are going to discuss the theme ozone for life. How the ozone layer is being damaged by the misuse of many things, especially refrigerators and misuse of our natural resources. So how the world have discussed it, and world has discussed it, and we have considered that ozone layer is very important for our life. So now we will listen to Ms. Sikha Bhasin. I'm congratulating Swati and Dr. Ms. Swati Viswas, Dr. Swati Viswas and Dr. Vibha Narang, Dr. Kanchan Srivastava and Dr. Anita for organizing this webinar under the aegis of IQAC and webinar committee of the college. Once again, my congratulations and thank you so much.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Dear Principal Sir, all of the teachers present here today, the students and everybody who has joined us over Facebook. Really good morning to all of you and very happy Ozone Day to all of you. It's really my honor to be speaking with you today, on the occasion of World Ozone Day. I've been working in the remit of the Montreal Protocol and cooling in India for the last few years at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And before I tell you a little bit more on sort of my perspective on why the Montreal Protocol is still extremely relevant and why we are actually taking the time to celebrate today as the World Ozone Day. Please allow me to sort of upload my slides and talk to you also a little bit about my organization. Before I get into the details of why I've been asked to speak to you today. So if someone could give me a thumbs up sign if the presentation is actually visible, that would be great. Perfect. Okay. So I'm from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. CEW is one of Asia's leading not-for-profit research institutions. We use data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach to explain with the attempt to change the use, reuse, and misuse of resources. The Council addresses pressing global challenges through an integrated and internationally focused approach. We pride ourselves on the independence of our high quality research and the partnerships that we have developed with public and private institutions and our attempts at engaging with the public. And today we're very, very grateful for this opportunity for us to be able to speak to you in detail about the sort of work that we've undertaken within the space of the Montreal Protocol. Now, in 2020, we have once again featured extensively across several categories in the 2019 Global Go-To Think Tank Index report, including as being ranked as South Asia's top think tank in our category for the 7th year in a row. We've also been ranked as South Asia's top energy and resource policy think tank for the 2nd year running. Our illustrious board is chaired by Mr. Jamshed Godrej. We also have Mr. Tarun Das, Dr. Anil Kakotkar, Mr. S. Ramodarai, Mr. Montek Singh Aluwalia, and Dr. Naushad Forbes. We're about 100 people in total that's part of the team, and we're led by our founding CEO, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, who unfortunately could not be here today and kindly asked me to step in. Now, in the last 10 years that we've actually been around, we've engaged in almost 300 different research projects across various research teams. You'll see all of these sort of squibbles up on your screen, which highlight the broad thematic areas where we actually focus our research on. But there's also a lot of work that you don't see on this slide that actually happens in a way that cuts across several of the teams. I am part of the Technology, Finance and Trade research track, where among other aspects, our work on global governance and international negotiations, including the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, is placed. And with that, I'd actually like to now start getting into a little bit more detail of the lecture itself that we've prepared for you. My talk is split into 3 broad parts. I first want to discuss with you the ozone story. I then want to talk to you about getting the Kigali Amendment deal. And then finally, I want to discuss and actually also hear a little bit from you in terms of what you mean it actually signifies to translate the Kigali commitments that India has signed on to into domestic plans and priorities. Right, so the place that we're at actually has a 35-year history. The International Day for the Preservation of the Ozone Layer, or the World Ozone Day as we call it, is celebrated annually today. This designation was made by the United Nations General Assembly in December 1994 in commemoration of the date in 1987, on which nations signed the historic Montreal Protocol to control the substances that deplete the ozone layer. But before the Montreal Protocol came into existence, there was the Vienna Convention for the protection of the ozone layer, which got instituted in 1985. Now, in the late 1970s, scientists discovered this hole in the ozone layer, the important shield, as many of people spoken before me has pointed out, that protects the Earth from the sun's harmful UV radiation. This hole was caused by chemicals known as ozone depleting gases that were used in aerosols and in cooling appliances such as refrigerators and air conditioners, and were threatening to increase cases of skin cancer and cataracts in human beings and cause immense damage to plants, crops, and ecosystems. It was in response to this that the Vienna Convention was adopted in 1985, and it aimed to promote cooperation among nations by exchanging information on the effects of human activities on the ozone layer. In doing so, the creators of the convention envisaged that policymakers and people around the world would adopt measures to combat these activities and try and attempt a save to ensure a mitigation of ozone depletion. The Vienna Convention was the first international treaty of any kind to be signed by every country involved, reaching universal ratification in 2009. This speaks to the severity of the ozone depletion problem at the time, but also the willingness of countries around the world to come together to solve it. It did not, however, require countries to take control actions to protect the ozone layer. This came later in the form of the Montreal Protocol. Now, under the convention's Montreal Protocol, governments, scientists, and industry have today worked together to eliminate almost 99% of all ozone depleting substances.
Hello,
And
Shikha.
as
Sorry to interrupt you, but participants are asking, can you put your slide in slideshow mode, your PPT?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so sorry. I thought it was in slideshow mode. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you so
sorry.
much.
I know this is a little bit of a busy slide, but as you can see, there is a lot that has happened in the last 35 years. And we tried very hard to put it together into one place. I'll be happy to share links with students, where you can actually get soft copies of this page, but also a lot more detailed
Oh, great.
information
Great.
for
That's great.
several of the tabs. But yeah, so as I was saying that, it today does mark 35 years, of what many people consider to be the most successful environmental treaty that there is. The Ozone Secretariat, which is the group of people that actually manage the Montreal Protocol and act as the desk for mandating the treaty, they have noted, and I would like to, if I may, actually quote them from what is on their website in celebration of today. They've written that it shows that collective decisions and action guided by science are the only way to solve major global crises. In this year of the coronavirus pandemic that has brought such social and economic hardship, the Ozone Treaty's message of working together in harmony and for the collective good is more important than ever. And this, ladies and gentlemen, and why it is important for you and I to be taking a moment to internalize and mark today with the spirit of celebration. Now, as most of you are already aware, the success of the ozone layer protection rests firmly on a succinct and systematic transition away from chlorofluorocarbons and hydrochlorofluorocarbons towards HFCs or hydrofluorocarbons. Now, while this transition has enabled the protection of the ozone layer, it led to a new, very wicked problem. HFCs, as you all know, are thousands of times more potent as greenhouse gases at a molecular level as compared to carbon dioxide. So while enabling cooling, they are in fact heating the climate and our planet even more. In 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is known as the IPCC for short, published a seminal study substantiating the urgency and limited time span of 12 years within which greenhouse gases must be lowered if global warming is to be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. As we continue to identify and grapple with the threats of global warming today, the reality of realizing these commitments and increasing our ambition continues to be reiterated in diplomatic circles, also reflective of non-governmental actions and the sentiments of populations such as you. India is one of the largest and fastest growing economies and has committed to meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement as well as of the Kigali Amendments. However, achieving this limit to a 2 degrees Celsius that the Paris Agreement mandates will require a lot more action from India and from the world. At the current rate, unfortunately, even if all global pledges that have been made under the Paris Agreement are met, the world is set to rise by at least 2.4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Now, in this increasingly warming world, the challenge of keeping global populations safe, healthy, and productive has become even more pronounced. Our rapidly urbanizing populations continue to find refuge in artificial cooled and heated oases. According to the International Energy Agency, the global air conditioning market will grow by 244% and will be valued at a market rate of US dollar 400 billion by 2050. This cooling is still largely based on refrigerants like HFCs and is the Achilles heel that we must look to solve for. HFCs provide relief from climate change on one hand, and yet themselves have a high global warming potential and contribute to it. A transition away from these gases, from HFCs alone, can help the world curb global warming by almost 0.5 degrees Celsius. We actually have the technical fix to saving climate change by 0.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century if we are able to completely restrain the use of hydrofluorocarbons or HFCs. Now, technical solutions and technologies that can actually replace these gases are available in plenty. But the decisions to curb their growth and phase down their consumption remain rife with commercial risks for industry and investors, and especially in settings where policy remains uncertain. And it is with this challenge in mind for the human population and the planet that the world came together and agreed to the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol in 2016. It was simply mandated with an effort to control these high global warming substances that are exacerbating global warming. The government of India, along with 196 countries, agreed to this, and it came into effect and as an amendment that is still managed within the Montreal Protocol. Now, at this juncture, India invoked a very special kind of leadership. It negotiated, as you will see in this slide, for a much longer timeline for itself to phase down the emissions arising from HFC production and consumption. It agreed that it would only start its peak and phase down much later in this decade as compared to other country groupings. Now, why did we do this? Primarily because it allows India a much longer timeline and a transition phase to recalibrate strategies and our own domestic plans to successfully meet our international commitments, of course. But while we do that, we also want to ensure that domestic priorities, such as industrial productivities, such as jobs, such as skills, such as manufacturing capacity, technology improvements, R&D, and energy efficiency, so that all of these different front lines that are just as important for our development are also enhanced and optimized. Now, I will get to how we are going to meet all of these different, demands that we have ahead of us when it comes to our development and our growth trajectory. But before I do that, I also want to take a few minutes to talk to you about the politics and the political economy that allowed India to take such a hard stand in actually creating for the first time a third set of countries altogether in an environmental agreement. Before this, as you all must have read, it's always been developed in developing countries. This was one of the first times that we actually took the leadership to create a phased out, to create another caveat of countries within the developing country segment. So it was no longer just developed and developing, but in fact, it was the developed economies or those with a historical industrial revolution path. We have fast growing economies in the form of several developing countries. And then there was the hot and ambient temperature country grouping that India led. So now this group is a unique group of countries where temperatures go well beyond 40 degrees in several parts of their geographies. And they all wanted a little bit longer to understand how the technology options that are currently present today will actually be able to adopt and be adapted into these geographies. It is with that sensibility that the entire negotiation actually agreed to this third track of countries. But of course, as with most things political, what you see is not the entire story. The entire story, actually, I am also not in a great position to be able to tell you. But I do have a lot of colleagues who, from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, were actually present in Kigali, supporting the government of India, but also supporting the Ozone Secretariat, which is, based out of the United Nations Environment Program, in being able to negotiate for a success that we all, as the world together, all 197 countries, are actually able to come out of it. So when the negotiations for the Kigali Amendment actually began, they began around 2009, 2010. And when these negotiations started, India was still very much on the fence with which way it wanted it to go. Did we even want for greenhouse gases to be commented on and controlled within the Montreal Protocol, or should the UNFCCC be looking at it? Should India be getting into technology partnership agreements with the US, or should India be looking to China as part of a larger developing country negotiating bloc? There was a lot of politicking at that point, bilaterally and multilaterally, that was going on. However, what was starkly missing at the time was data. So how much was India actually going to emit? What was our growth trajectory of air conditioning and HFC consumption actually going to look like? There was a paper that had been written academically where one of the authors had very loosely suggested that developing countries would be contributing about 25%, right? So their greenhouse gases would have 25% contributions directly from HFCs. Now, 25% of your emissions, especially for a country like India, are massive, right? But where was this number coming from? Nobody could really quite identify. And so it was up to a lot of the independent think tanks such as CEW, and there were several other involved in similar initiatives of actually being able to try and assess the science and the data that could support our own government in understanding what the growth trajectory for us would look like, and therefore what we should be negotiating for. So CEW, as I mentioned, went to great lengths and found several academic partners to try and assimilate projections for HFCs given our market reality and given our growth trajectory for cooling. And what we found was that by mid-century, unlike the 25% number that had been doing the rounds, a maximum of 7% of our emissions profile would actually come from HFCs. And this is under a business as usual scenario. So when we realize that, hey, if our growth is actually going to be so paced and we're only contributing about 7% of our own national greenhouse gas emissions portfolio, and sort of looking to HFCs for that, we actually have a lot more time to be able to transition, because in absolute numbers, it does not mean as much as 25% would have. It also showed that our peak would automatically therefore be much longer, and growth was going to be paced out. This growth was not just for the emissions, but also in terms of the uptake of the technologies, of the refrigerators, of the air conditioners, of the cold chain development that HFCs were actually being used for. The second piece of analysis that we did, which really came in useful, was what are the technology alternatives that are already available, right? So we have to move away from HFCs. Whether we do it now, we do it 7 years later, is not the point for this analysis. The point was what alternatives already exist. And what CEW found was that 98% of applications where HFCs were used, technology alternatives existed. Were they cheap? In some cases, yes. Were they very expensive and almost unattainable? In some cases, also, yes. So then we tried to get a sense of, and this was the third final piece of research that really sort of helped build the puzzle together. And this was the cost of transition. So there was this paper that came out that also tried to assimilate, given the HFC emissions profile, given India's growth profile, given the technology alternatives available, at what point does it become economically feasible, or what are the costing profiles actually looking like? And what we found that if India was going to start transitioning after the year 2030, it would cost us, the transition would cost us about 12 billion euros. However, if we were to initiate this transition before the year 2030, it would cost us more than almost 3 times, actually, 34 billion euros. So given the cost of transition, given the emissions profile, and then given the emissions trajectory that we had found for ourselves, the government of India actually negotiated very hard and created this absolute leadership in being able to deploy and get the entire world to agree to a third grouping. A second big thing that happened at that time was that we could already see a market shift in India, right? So Godrej had already started putting out air conditioners in the market using propane. Daikin and Panasonic had already started looking to R32 as a blend and far lower in its global warming potential. So we also got that encouragement to be able to negotiate also backwards a little bit, that, okay, we want to do it after 2030, but we are seeing that there is a market shift already playing out in India domestically. So here is a little bit of pushback when it comes to our peaking, but we will also pull back a little bit more when it comes to when we're actually going to start phasing down. And so that is really how the entire agreement came to being. No country got 100% of what they really wanted, but most countries walked away fairly happy with what they had signed on to, India included. So now that I've spoken to you about how the agreement actually came into being, right? It's also important for us to really think about, okay, well, we understand that there is an agreement. We understand that we've also struck a deal that makes sense for India. What next? So what next has been a busy few years for us at the council, because we have tried to pick up all of these international commitments and translate them into understanding what the public policy landscape in India today looks like and what it should look like going forward for us to meet our international commitments. But as we meet these commitments, we want to make sure that they are encouraging of the Indian economy, of Indian industry, of Indian jobs, of Indian competitiveness, and of course of local preservation and environment as well. So it was with keeping all of that in mind that last year the government of India actually came out with the India Cooling Action Plan. The India Cooling Action Plan was the first effort of its kind globally to put forward a seminal policy document that speaks about cooling holistically. So, why cooling? Why not just air conditioning? Because in a country like India, where millions and millions of people are affected by heat stress year on year, where access to electricity is only recently become a universal reality, it's extremely important for us to take cognizance of the fact that you and I can sit in our comfortable colleges, in our comfortable offices, and discuss about these big global problems. But for people who do not have a refrigerator at home to be able to store their own milk in or their own fresh produce in, the reality is very, very different. And when we talk about cooling, we are taking into account that entire population that is Indian. So the India Cooling Action Plan brought together several government agencies, including, of course, the Ministry of Power, it was spearheaded by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, but it brought together, government agencies that are in charge of agriculture and cold chain, agencies that are responsible for commercial interests in our industry, agencies that are responsible for chemicals, because that's what the alternatives to HFCs, that's the line ministry for that. And all of these different entities, as well as industry and civil society, came together to truly develop and deploy a multi-stakeholder led, multifaceted cooling action plan. So now the cooling action plan actually highlights the need and the priority of the government to enable thermal comfort for all of its populations. Yet it wants to do it in a way that it is sustainable in terms of technology choices, but also in terms of the energy consumption. I will be happy to speak to you all about the energy consumption dynamic and dimension of cooling. But I'm not really sure if that's of interest. So if it is, we can come back to it. But for the meantime, I would like to speak to you all about what it means to then sort of translate these commitments into domestic priorities. So once this commitment got reached and the development of the India Cooling Action Plan began, we at CEW started thinking about, what should the regulatory environment actually look like? So we have this policy coming into place of the Cooling Action Plan, which is a policy priority, right? It is not a law, it is not an act, and it is definitely not a regulatory mandate on anybody. It is a guiding document that talks about, almost a wish list of everything that we would like to achieve in India when it comes to thermal comfort and sustainable cooling for all. And so we at CEW started thinking about what happened in the last transition. This is not the first time that India is going to have to transition its refrigerants. We did that already with ozone depleting substances. And what we wanted to understand was, who really benefited from that and who lost out from an industry and a jobs point of view. What are the kind of incentives that key stakeholders, which is of course industry, what are the kind of incentives that they are looking to for from the government of India in actualizing and realizing and implementing these Kigali Amendment commitments domestically. And it is with that ambition in mind that we undertook a lot of primary data analysis through the course of 2018. And we arrived at some really interesting findings. The first and foremost was that industry was not interested in investing, even though there was this international commitment. Industry did not want to invest in this transition unless it had a very clear direction from the government of India. The second thing that came out was almost a lack of awareness, which I think in a lot of ways the India Cooling Action Plan has tried to rectify. But back in 2018, before the Cooling Action Plan had come out, we found that there were several information packages that needed to be developed. One was for the industry itself, right? That what is the plan? When do we need to start doing this? And who needs to start doing what in order for us to achieve these goals? The second information packet was what refrigerant should we be moving towards? You know, what are the alternatives that exist and which of these is the government of India interested in supporting or not, or which ones are the ones that Indian industry is moving towards. And then finally, the third one related to the end users, but also the service technicians. So if industry creates complete new technology and the government mandates that new technology, but the consumer does not really pay any attention to it, we know it's not going to go very far. I mean, I'm sure you all remember in school, and one of the reasons why we're here today is because we as consumers understand that CFCs and aerosols were back in the day, were bad back in the day for the ozone, which is why we all kept looking for those, ozone-friendly signages when we were growing up. At least I realize I'm talking to a much younger audience, so you probably didn't have that experience. But we were all very cognizant of the fact that our purchasing behavior and pattern had to change, and we had to be a part of that solution that was adopting to new technology if we were to save the ozone layer. And it is a similar sort of understanding that today is again needed for people to understand that, hey, when I'm buying an air conditioner, how many people actually recognize that they're contributing to global warming? People think that they're doing well for the ozone, which they are, but that's a technology transition that we've been successful at. People don't quite recognize that they are still very much through their purchase contributing to a much larger problem that we do have to come up with solutions for. Um, and then as part of that solution package, another thing that needs to happen is that you have the technology, you have the policy, you might even have the consumer ready to pay a price to buy that technology. But what happens to that untrained service technician who is coming into your house, who is not aware or who is not skilled enough to be able to identify the different types of refrigerants that might exist, and how do we treat each of them? So there needs to be a readiness across the supply side, because you can have the technology change, but what other technology changes are needed across the supply chain in different components, and then in the scalability of the people who manage, maintain, and operate those appliances. So we came up with all of these very concrete, steps that the government needed to look at, that industry needed to look at, that we as civil society and think tanks needed to look at, in order to really start implementing the Kigali Amendment into India. And the reason that we did this was not just to be a part of the larger global solution. While we were doing this, we recognized that from an industrial scale, when you think about Make in India, when you think about policy announcements like doubling of farmers' income, when you think about Skill India mission, all of these are pertinent and very, very crucial to our development story. And this entire technology transition actually provides a very unique opportunity for us to give a fillip, not just to our large industries, but also to the medium and small enterprises to really, get our manufacturing and jobs up again. If the air conditioning, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning sector, HVAC as it's known as, is identified as a Make in India priority sector, we can be assured of the fact that the number of jobs, given the kind of market size that India is going to have for air conditioners, are going to increase at least tenfold. And I say this because our market size for air conditioners is going to increase 11-fold in the next 2 decades. That is a lot of air conditioners flooding the Indian market, and they're not flooding it because there's a lot of manufacturing, they're flooding it because there's that kind of demand. So imagine if our industry could actually come together in providing and catering to this demand rather than importing from elsewhere. We're talking about millions of jobs being created. In terms of jobs, when you have these many air conditioners then flooding the market, today the 2 lakh technicians that are formally recognized could easily grow up to 2 million. 2 million jobs just of technicians to look at your household air conditioners. These are massive numbers that we're talking about. It is these kind of numbers that I can give to you also for cold chain, also for energy efficiency potential, and several other development priorities that we really need to think about as a country. And is really the reason why we at CEW focus so much of our attention to helping in solving this problem. Finally, a last word about the organization again, right? A lot of what I've spoken to you about, we have very directly been involved in these conversations with industry and with government. And like I mentioned, we're doing this, yes, for international commitments in the international environment, but we're doing this very much with the priority to put India's development front and center of any of these solutions. And that really is what public policy is about. It's about suggesting policy that really is in public interest. And that is what we at CEW attempt to do. Yes, we do research, and yes, we do research on environmental issues. But those sectors could be in the environment. The priority still very much remains, development, well-being, and health of the planet, but also the people that are in it. And with that, I will stop and hand over to Aditi or Miss Swati. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an informative and well-researched session. And we are privileged to be a part of the seminar. And I would like to focus on the point that ma'am's research lies at the interface of policy and academia and has been used to ascertain strategies in various government and international organizations and philanthropies. We cordially thank you, ma'am, for sharing your insights with this enlightening session. Now, the floor is open for discussion and questions. So, ma'am, there is a question in the chat box. Should I read it out for you? Okay. Ma'am, Prabir Singh asks that given the quality of Indian coal is not of a very high quality, why is the government auctioning so many coal blocks, some of which are in eco-sensitive zones, instead of focusing on alternative energy sources?
Okay, thank you, Kabir, for your question. I don't actually think I'm fully equipped or informed enough to be able to respond to it because I don't work in the power sector directly. However, so I can't really make a comment on why the government is focusing on coal, and selling or like auctioning it off, especially in eco-sensitive areas. That's a conversation for another time. However, I will make a point of the fact that I don't think that there is not a focus on alternative energy sources in India. I think India, in terms of the per person spend, in terms of the kind of subsidies and the policy priority that is given to solar, wind power, hydro, and other forms of renewable energy, is amongst the highest in the world. Our ambition, just within solar power, right? Even if I'm not looking at renewable energy or other forms of, looking at wind power or other forms of renewable energy, our ambition alone has shaken up the world market in terms of solar targets, right? And this has translated not just in terms of like domestic energy security, becoming an ambition and, coming closer to recognize it. It's also taught the world in a lot of ways what it means to have access to capital and put it correctly towards infrastructure development. And India has actually done that through the International Solar Alliance. That's really the mission of it, right? That let countries who are solar rich come together, in actually trying to create agency, in trying to create financing solutions, in trying to create like cooperative mechanisms for the rollout to be a lot faster and a lot smoother. So I wouldn't say that the government is not focusing on alternative energy sources. However, I'm not so sure I'm fully equipped to answer your question about the coal auctions.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there is another question by uh, Kamla ji, and he asks that more than 70% of the people using refrigerators and air conditioners, and many industries cause pollution. So, how can we decrease pollution and save ozone?
So, as I mentioned, actually, the kind of refrigerants that we are today using are good for the ozone. So we are no longer really in a position of being able to destroy the ozone because we've already left those technologies behind us. And also to your figure on the 70% of people using refrigerant and air conditioners, this is going to come as a little bit of a shock to you because the data that the government of India in its India Cooling Action Plan has put out is that a maximum of 10% of households in India have access to refrigerators and air conditioners. 10% of households. So it's a very, very, very small number and a very, that all of us belong to. And it is only when we start thinking about the growth of this number, right? Because we want more and more people to have access to, refrigerators and air conditioners and a comfortable lifestyle. That is exactly why the transition that India committed to was a little delayed, because our growth of these products and our growth and internalization of these products is going to take longer. And that is exactly why we're focusing on solving for this problem, keeping industry and production in mind for India.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there is another question by Smriti ji, and she asks that did the lockdown during COVID-19 play any role in protecting the ozone layer?
Not to my knowledge, no. I don't think it had any impact on it.
All right, ma'am. Ma'am, Kamla ji again asks, many policies and programs and slogans have been coming out every year to protect environment and climate change. So are the policies and programs that effective in implementation?
Well, it depends what policy we're talking about, right? And to be fair, a policy is only as good as well as it is implemented, because most laws are good, right? How well and how effectively they get implemented is really where the complications lie, and that's where they arise as well. Um, and so when we think about environmental programs and we think about policies that target climate change, if you look at India itself, right, especially in the space of climate, um, while all of the programs that we have that actually benefit climate have a sensibility of industrial development, jobs, and growth for the country. And that's exactly the point that I was making as well, right? That we have this international commitment, So to take your question, yes, Kigali Amendment exists. Now, how effectively is it going to get implemented? It's only going to get implemented effectively if Indians see a benefit in it. If it's just about saving the environment and saving the world, it is unfortunately not going to be as large a priority for the majority of our country, because a large majority of our country still has trouble in terms of getting out of poverty, in being able to access jobs and education and healthcare. And so those will always take precedence in terms of solving for problems.
All right, ma'am. Thank you. Do you want to take some more questions? Because we have a couple more.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Maybe we can try and close this in another like 10 minutes.
All right, ma'am. Sure. So Ritik sir asks, what is the role of geopolitics in protection of ozone layer, as harmonious relation between countries are important, so that there could be good steps towards protecting environment?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The role of geopolitics in terms of the Kigali Amendment is yet to really play itself out. I mean, we saw that when the negotiations were happening, where lots of different countries and country groupings had put their own proposals for how they wanted the Kigali Amendment to be structured. And the fact is that no one won all of the points that they wanted, right? It was a negotiation and people came together. There were different parts that different countries sort of won, if I can call it that. So geopolitics remains important. The sanctity of international treaties and cooperation remains important. And if there's one thing that this year is teaching us, is that as a global community, there is a need for people and countries to come together. And perhaps we would do well to look to the ozone treaty and the Kigali Amendment and the Montreal Protocol to learn a lesson or two, because what we see playing out today politically does not really, signify that level of global cooperation. If anything, we as the world seem to be turning more and more inwards. And the fact remains that we're not going to be able to solve for global problems simply by looking within our own national borders.
Okay, ma'am. So we have, I think this is the last question. So Vibha ma'am asks that we have heard of ozone layer reviving. Tell me something about this.
So I actually don't have the chemical science of it to be able to tell you, but I'd be happy to send across a few links where you can look at it. So what happened was that as a result of this entire excessive use of CFCs and HCFCs, there was a gaping hole that was discovered, and people and scientists recognized that it was causing a lot of harm to the human race, but also to other ecosystem aspects and specifications. It is because of that that we came with the Montreal Protocol to remove those refrigerants from the technologies that we use and bring in the current set of technologies that we are using, which is called HFCs. And it is with increased use of that and this sort of effort over the last 25 years, where more than 99% of these gases have actually been removed from production and consumption, that has led to a 99% of healing of the ozone layer. And this sort of brings me back to the point that I was making, that when the world decides to come together, and you create technologies, but also the political solutions, to arrive at a positive space and to solve for a problem, we're able to do that, and we can see that that's what's happened with the ozone layer.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we are up for time, like because of the paucity of time, I don't think we could be accommodating more questions. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So I would now like to invite Dr. Anita ma'am for concluding remarks on this wonderful session.
Yes, now it's on. I think I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. A very good afternoon, everyone. Happy World Ozone Day 2020. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on the occasion of Global Ozone Day. On behalf of Bionomy, the Society of Botany and Zoology, Atmaram Sanatan Dharma College, I'm thankful to our eminent speaker, Ms. Shikha Bhasin, Program Lead, Council on Energy, Environment and Water, for her thought-provoking and insight-stimulating presentation on enabling international commitments, implementing domestic priorities, and showcasing India's leadership in the Kigali Amendment. I am convinced that her words has a magnetic effect on the minds of the audience. India, a signatory to the protocol since 1992, has been proactive in compliance and played a key role in achieving the historic Kigali Amendment last year for phasing down hydrofluorocarbons, chlorofluorocarbons, and powerful greenhouse gases, thus contributing to global climate change. Kigali Amendment has received climate-friendly cooling. It is estimated that phase down of hydrofluorocarbons under the amendment could avoid up to 0.5 degrees centigrade of global warming by the end of the century, thus supporting climate-friendly cooling, continuing to protect the ozone layer. Fortunately, natural refrigerant alternatives like ammonia, carbon dioxide, and hydrocarbons are already proven and widely available with track record of safety, energy efficiency, and environmentally friendliness. In fact, only ammonia has zero ozone depleting potential and zero global warming potential. Now, I am further thankful to our vibrant, dynamic, and charismatic principal, Dr. Gyantosh Kumar Jha, for encouraging the department and providing a beautiful platform as well as all logistic support for organizing this webinar. I would also like to thank my fellow colleagues, Dr. Vibha Narang, Dr. Swati M. Biswas, who is also the convener of this webinar, and Dr. Kanchan Srivastava. I would like to acknowledge our gratitude to Dr. Vinita Tuli, convener, webinar committee, and to all the members of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell for their enormous cooperation in the organization and technical arrangement of this webinar. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated student volunteers and colleagues for their involvement to make this webinar successful. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the audience who connected with us on this virtual platform and made the webinar a success. Thank you once again. Save ozone, save Earth. Nice meeting you.
Thank you everyone for being a part of the seminar and all the patience you've given us. And I would like to thank the hard work of the team and all the teachers, students, organizers, Madam Speaker, and every team member to make this possible. And always remember the 3 R's: reuse, recycle, and reduce. And happy ozone day.
Thank you.